Welcome to the Fantasy Draft Weekly Rundown. Joining me as always is co-host and NFL Ironman London Fletcher. London, I got to start by asking you about this Jaguars offense. What's wrong with them, and can they get back on track?
Well, first and foremost, their run game. That's what's wrong with them. You know, only averaging 71 yards per game rushing. That's 31st in the National Football League, and this is even after adding Chris Ivory, who had a really good year last year for the Jets. So that I think it will be a good start for the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. I'm really surprised when you look at their passing game, when you think about the type of success they had last year with the two Allen brothers. You know, they both went over for over 1,000 yards. I think Hearns had no, not Hearns. Robinson had 14 touchdowns receiving, and him and Blake Bortles and those guys, they just have not connected well thus far.
Yeah, and Robinson dropped another touchdown this week, which could have been, big points for both of them. So I'm hoping they get going this week. We'll get to them. But really, they've been frustrating to watch up to this point. So I wanted to get your take there. But how about this for a question? We've clearly got three backs that stand out above the pack to this point. David Johnson, Le'Veon Bell, and Ezekiel Elliott. I want to know, how do you rank them moving forward?
Man, those are all three excellent backs. I think because of the passing aspect and the receiving aspect, I would probably go Le'Veon Bell first out of those three guys because of the things that they do with him in the passing game in Pittsburgh, even with the Roethlisberger being injured. I don't know how many games he'll miss, but you have to believe that they're going to rely on Le'Veon Bell even more with Roethlisberger being injured. And then I would probably go David Johnson second again, only because of the receipt. You know what? No, I'm going to go Ezekiel Elliott second. The Cardinals, I'm still not convinced with them in their run game, although David Johnson had a big game for a touchdown against the Jets on Monday night. I still like Ezekiel Elliott and the run that he's been on, with the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, that's just a phenomenal streak he has going. And then I'll go David Johnson third.
That's tough. I got David Johnson first. That offensive line is unbelievable for the Cowboys, for Elliott. They're all so close. It's really a matter of opinion at this point. But it's interesting you put David Johnson third, because I think he'd be my first on that list.
I don't know. I think I know more about it than you.
There we go. London.
Always try to go back on that just to mess with you a little bit, to trump you.
Exactly. London marking his territory here. His football-related things he knows better than I. But let's get to the picks for this week. I'm going to start with the quarterback, Joe Flacco. We just watched Carson Palmer put in a disappointing performance against the Jets, but it's because David Johnson was so dominant. And really, this Jets defense is not that giving to opposing backs. It's just that David Johnson is pretty darn good. And a stat that I found interesting is Joe Flacco's attempted 40-plus passes in every game since week one. That's a lot for Joe Flacco. And the run game really isn't that solid, so they're not going to pound it on this defense. I think he's going to be throwing 40-plus times again. He's only 10,900 on Fantasy Draft. The secondary is clearly beatable. We've seen it with Revis and with the rest of these guys. With all the flags they had yesterday yet again, they were beatable all game. They just decided to run the ball against him. I think Flacco's a great play against the Jets this week. Who you got, London?
I like your thought with going with Flacco at the quarterback position. I'm gonna go with Andy Dalton. I like Dalton, man, going against the Cleveland Browns, and I know Dalton has struggled thus far this year, and really the Cincinnati Bengals and general as a team have struggled thus far this year. But I feel that he gets it going against the Cleveland Browns at home. Him and AJ Green get it rolling. I just feel that they'll have a big breakthrough game against the Browns.
Yeah, I really like that call. I'm way on AJ Green. I was just doing research before this, so I really am on that passing game. I agree with you, especially because Joe Hayden is still injured, which definitely helps everyone's cause there. Let's move on to running back. DeMarco Murray is not priced correctly for my liking this week. I think anyone against the Colts defense should see an uptick in price. His has gone down, And, you look at the guys like Le'Veon Bell and the guys above him, and he's got upside that matches them, bit for bit. He's averaging 4.6 yards per carry, and he's getting 75% of his team's red zone rushes. We obviously love that against Indy, which woke up the sleeping giant in Lamar Miller last week, who'd been receiving a heavy workload, just hadn't done anything yet. Indy's allowing 4.8 yards per carry, over 117 yards rushing, but this is what I really like about it. They've allowed 33 receptions, 346 yards receiving, and a league-worst 4 receiving touchdowns to the backs. Now, here are the guys who have caught more passes amongst backs than DeMarco Murray: Giovanni Bernard and Theo Riddick, and that's it. So if this defense is going to allow, receivers out of the backfield, Murray is one of the best. At least he's proven it this year. So I think you really got to like him. He's my number 1 back this week, and he's not priced that way. So I love DeMarco Murray. Who do you got this week?
I have a back that's priced even better, in my opinion. Spencer Ware going against the New Orleans Saints at home. You look at what he did against the Oakland Raiders on the road last week, 131 yards on 24 carries. And that was even with the Chiefs going into the game, emphasizing, hey, we're going to, give Jamal Charles the ball a lot more. But you look at it, he had 24 carries, Tony, 11 for Jamal Charles. And then I look at the New Orleans Saints. They're 26th versus the run, but more importantly, they're giving up 11 rushing TDs on the season. So you have to love Spencer Ware. He's only going to cost you $11,000 on FantasyDraft. For me, that's a guy that you definitely have to put in your lineup at the running back position.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think a lot of people are expecting Charles to continue to get healthier, and I've been hearing nothing but bad things about him, that he's not confident in his knee still. So I'm with you. Spencer Ware's the guy there. Charles is, they'll work him in, but this is Spencer Ware's show, and Jamal Charles is just living in it. So let's move on to the wide receiver position. I'm going to start with a guy who's blatantly obvious, but if we're spending down at quarterback, we can afford him. Julio Jones. This is a guy who just torched the Seahawks last week. The Falcons' passing game as a whole has been pretty good against the Broncos and Seahawks on consecutive weeks, and now they get the Chargers, who are allowing 280 pass yards a game. They don't have Jason Verrett. This just sets up perfectly for him. He's going to match up against Steve Williams, who's graded outside the top 30 at the cornerback position. And, we learned with him against Carolina that if he's not facing a top corner, he can absolutely go off on any week. So Julio Jones, love him this week. And we talked about the Jaguars, and this is kind of my last stand on Allen Robinson this week. If he can't get it done against a Raiders team that's allowed the most fantasy points to receivers, then I'm just going to put a fork on him in him for this year. He's only he hasn't. Let me put it this way: he hasn't exceeded 72 yards receiving this year, which is pretty disappointing for a guy that we thought was a true wide receiver one. He's averaged 9.4 targets per game, so it's not like they haven't been looking at him. He just hasn't been converting. That's partially due to Bortles, but that's also on him. He dropped that touchdown last week. But against this Raiders team, I'm going back to the well. He doesn't match up against Sean Smith all that often. He moves around the formation, so I think it's going to be a good day for him. And if it's not, it's time to forget about Allen Robinson. Who you got at receiver?
I'm going to spin up as well at the wide receiver position. And I'm going to take A.J. Green. I mentioned my thoughts on believing that Andy Dalton will have a big game against the Cleveland Browns. Well, if Andy Dalton's going to have a big game against the Browns, then that means A.J. Green is also going to have a big game against the Cleveland Browns. Last time he faced the Cleveland Browns a season ago, he had 5 receptions, 128 yards for a TD. This season, the Cleveland Browns defense has allowed 16 TDs through the air. So there's a lot to love about this matchup with A.J. Green, and especially I got my quarterback Andy Dalton to go with Green.
There you go. It'd be interesting to see if you can fit all 3 in a lineup. I'm going to try that, but I know it'll probably be hard under the salary cap. Let's move on to tight end.
Use my guys, not your guys. My 3 guys, not yours.
There you go. Let's move on to tight end. I got Hunter Henry, and I was just looking at some statistics. Antonio Gates actually ran more pass routes last week, 22-19. But it came out early this week that Antonio Gates is still dealing with the injury that hampered him earlier in the season. So I'm not even sure Gates is going to play this week. It sounds like If he is, he's going to continue to be limited, but they may hold him back with the kind of pain he's feeling. But then again, we look at Hunter Henry, scored in 3 consecutive games with 60-plus yards. I don't know if you've been watching, but I've noticed they've been lining him up as a wide receiver a lot too, which you kind of got to like. So, not only is he playing tight end, he's playing receiver, which, he's got a lot more speed than Gates, so they're targeting him downfield, they're targeting him short. He's just kind of a versatile option who's filling in for, their lack of Danny Woodhead and Keenan Allen. And he's facing a Falcons team that's already allowed the 4th most fantasy points and 5 touchdowns to tight ends. So if Gates is limited, Rivers has no choice but to look for Henry, who looks athletic. He looks awfully good, and he's going to line up everywhere. So I really like Henry for this price. Who you got at tight end?
I just to kind of piggyback on your Hunter Henry pick, I liked Hunter Henry coming out of college. I had him up there as one of my top tight ends coming out in this year's draft. For me, my tight end is going to be an old guy who's coming back this year after having a couple injury-filled seasons, and that's Dennis Pitta for the Baltimore Ravens. It seems like him and Flacco, your quarterback that you like this week, has a comfort with Dennis Pitta. And you look at the last 2 ball games, he's had 13 catches in the last 2 games. And I just look at the Jets; they're kind of banged up at linebacker. The Jets defense has not been great against the pass. The Jets defense just hasn't been good at all this year. But I just see Flacco being able to take advantage of their passing defense, and he's going to target his guy, Dennis Pitta. Especially, I'm not sure if Steve Smith Sr. will be able to play either, so that can also increase the targets for Dennis Pitta.
I just want to throw one more guy out there at tight end, Jack Doyle, because it looks like Dwayne Allen is not going to play this week, and Jack Doyle's listed as the absolute minimum. So if you want to spend up for these receivers, I think he's a good way to do it, even more cheap than the two guys we mentioned. Let's move to defense. This one is kind of easy for me. Now that Landry Jones is quarterbacking for the Steelers, it's a whole different ball game. I look at the defenses that are cheap, and I really don't see anything. New England's about as cheap as I can find for defense and still like it. So I'm going to go against Landry Jones. Antonio Brown has not been good with him. He's been the 62nd best receiver, or he was last year, in terms of fantasy production under Landry Jones. So if we're not worried about him, it's a whole different offense. I like the Patriots. Who do you got at defense?
Because I spent down at the running back position and the tight end position, I have room to go and get the number 1 ranked defense, the most expensive defense on fantasy draft, and that's the Minnesota Vikings going to Philadelphia after a bye week. I just love this Vikings defense. They have the style of play that they can go into anybody's building and still play lights out football. You look at the struggles that Carson Wentz had against the Washington Redskins, a defense that's nowhere near the level of the Minnesota Vikings. They only had 239 total yards of offense against the Washington Redskins. Again, I love the Minnesota Vikings. They're coming off a bye week. This is a unit that can go anywhere, play anybody, and still dominate.
Yeah, I love that unit. If I could, have them every week in cash games, I would. The problem is they're getting so expensive, and you got to spend everywhere else. I'm going to have a difficult time.
I'm spending down in some other place. I gave you Spencer Ware, for as a guy you like. I'm going to touch on one other wide receiver. I meant to mention this earlier. I like Brandon Marshall against the Baltimore Ravens. And I know Fitzpatrick has struggled, but Brandon Marshall, he loves him. He's the type of guy who can have big games, produce. And you look at Odell Beckham Jr. going for over 200 yards in the second half, man, against the Ravens. And you have to love Brandon Marshall in this matchup.
Yeah, I was happy to see they named Fitzpatrick the starter moving forward, too. I don't think Geno Smith is going to change anything. I mean, it's really their bad defense they need to fix before their bad offense. So they might as well go with Fitzpatrick, and we know that's helpful for Marshall moving forward. All right, London, let's get to the questions because people got some football-related ones for you this week, which is kind of
finally.
I know, it's different than normal.
That's odd.
With people asking you other things, but let's start with this one. They're asking you about defense, so I know you got this. Is the Bills' defense as good as I think it is? From at Bruce Nadex.
From a fantasy perspective, you would have to say yes. And you look at the Buffalo Bills defense. I think they're second. They're second in the league in the NFL in sacks with 20, only trailing the Denver Broncos, who have 21 sacks. They had 6 interceptions on the season, 6 fumble recoveries, and they're 5th in points allowed. So there's a lot to like about this Buffalo Bills defense. And then they give you 12.5 fantasy points per game. So I would say right now this Bills defense is as advertised, and it's kind of I think they're as good as the guy thinks.
It's finally happening for Rob Ryan, the coordinator, who's had a bunch of terrible defenses. They look terrible early.
Actually, if you something that has been understated is when Rex Ryan made the change at the offensive coordinator position, going from Roman to Lynn, he made a change in the defensive play caller as well. Rob Ryan is not calling the defense anymore. Dennis Thurman is, and you've seen that defense play a lot better. They've simplified things. They're not doing all of those exotic schemes and exotic blitzes, and the fruit has been they've reaped the benefits of it.
There you go. That would make sense to me. That no longer Rob Ryan. There you go. Inside information from London Fletcher. That's why we have him on the show. Let's move on to the next question. This guy wants to know. This is from @FarrellNFL about Corey Coleman. What you think of him? And I think this is a perfect time because last week you talked about playing through a fracture in your foot. Well, Corey Coleman's a receiver who fractured his hand. He broke his hand. So do you think he could come back this year from this and still be effective?
Well, being that it is his hand, and he is a receiver, and last time I checked, you need your hands to catch the ball. I think the key is if they hold him back until he's 100% healthy and the bone is fully healed, then I think this is something that he can come back and contribute, the rest of the season. He has tremendous talent, and we were starting to see him make some plays in the preseason before he got injured. I just like Corey Coleman. I mean, the guy can fly, competitive guy, reminds a lot of people of a young Steve Smith senior. So I just think he's the type of guy who can bounce back from this injury.
Yeah, as long as they hold him. I mean, broken bones are usually 4 to 6 weeks. As long as you wait until it's absolutely healed, there shouldn't be a setback or anything. Once the bone heals, it heals. So I hope you're right. I really liked Corey Coleman. I mean, Terrell Pryor has done a nice job in his absence, but it would be fun to see both these guys working at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we haven't really seen that yet. So until next time, I'm Ricky Sanders with London Fletcher, and we are out.